What if I told you that the original size of clarinet is actually near extinction? When we think about clarinet, we most often are going to think about the B-flat clarinet. And this is by far the most common size of clarinet. But it's not the original size. In fact, clarinet, if you know your etymology, literally means little trumpet, little clarino. Clarino was a style of trumpet playing where the players played in the upper harmonics up to the 16th harmonic. This produced a very clear sound in Baroque orchestras. The style was largely abandoned by the classical era, but its holdover was the clarinet, which emulated in some ways that clear sound of the clarino trumpet playing. And today we call the upper register of the clarinet the clarino range, or the clarion, literally meaning trumpet. But it wasn't played on the B-flat clarinet. It wasn't played on the A clarinet. It was played on the small D clarinet. And today we don't see the D clarinet very often. Why was it a clarinet in D? Well, because most of the trumpets of the era were in D. So to match the key, the clarinet was built in the same key as the trumpet. So it would have been a little bit smaller than this. Well, actually it would have been about this size right here, because this is a D clarinet. Well, most of a D clarinet. This is the body, barrel, and bell of a D clarinet, but with no keywork. It's got all the posts and all the springs on it, but this is just the body. And, well, you can't do too much with just the body, other than take a lot of measurements. The D clarinet is by far the least common size of clarinet that is still produced today. Now, there are rarer sizes like bass clarinets in C and in A, but by and large they're not built today except by Steve Fox. He's really the only one who's going to make a bass clarinet in those sizes. But the D clarinet is still produced by a few companies. This particular instrument happens to be by Buffet. It's a R13 model. It's actually a discontinued model. They've moved over to the RC Prestige. Now, that's the only one that's sold by a major manufacturer. It is the only French or Böhm system D clarinet that is currently available. There are German system D clarinets. But where do we see the D clarinet? Well, of course, we see it in that early Baroque music. The earliest pieces for clarinet were for the D clarinet. You find this most often in the concertos by Molter. And then you really don't see much music for D clarinet until the late 1800s. It'll pop up a little bit in Liszt. You'll see it in some Wagner, Die Walküre. Will have parts for D clarinet, and then the person who really starts to take it up is Mahler. Mahler will use this, and Strauss. The most important solo for D clarinet is from Till Eulenspiegel. It is almost always, though, played today on the E-flat clarinet. The D clarinet and the E-flat clarinet can be thought of as a pair. The E-flat is a little bit smaller. The D clarinet's a little bit longer, but they form a pair just like the B flat and A clarinets do. They're half a step apart so that one is good in playing flat keys, one's good in playing in sharp keys. The D and the E flat do something similar. However, because the E flat itself is already an auxiliary instrument, players don't see the need to have a secondary auxiliary. The parts will often be transposed a half a step so that you can play the D clarinet part. Another piece that calls for the D clarinet is the right of spring. the player will alternate between the D and the E flat throughout the part. It is said that the D clarinet is going to have a little bit of a sweeter tone color than the E flat. The E flat is often described as being rather biting and harsh, whereas the D is a little bit sweeter. So composers have sometimes taken advantage of this. I know of one piece in the orchestral literature where both a E flat and a D are used at the same time, and that's Rimsky-Korsakov's Mlada in the section titled The Night on Mount Triglav. In it, he has a duet between the two instruments. Interestingly, in that same piece, he also has a duet between a C and a D flat piccolo, which you can see right behind me. D flat, C. So interesting use of tone colors there by Rimsky-Korsakov. How often it's actually done in a performance, I don't know. The piece actually isn't performed that often, even though it is one of Rimsky-Korsakov's orchestrational masterpieces. One of the problems with finding a D clarinet is they are expensive. Buffet charges an arm and a leg for such a small instrument. No affordable D clarinets have ever been made. If you want to get one of these brand new, you're looking $8,000 and up for something so tiny, so small. And so players don't want to commit that extra expense to having another instrument that they may pull out once a year when a piece calls for it. So you're not going to see it that often. Now, a few players will use the D clarinet, and these are often players who are in some of the top tier orchestras. I know that the player of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra has a D clarinet and will use it whenever it's called for. The Dallas Symphony Orchestra that I'm more familiar with here in Texas, they are known to use a D clarinet as well. In Germany, it is more common because you do have more manufacturers over there who produce a D clarinet, albeit in the German system. But here in the US, finding a D clarinet is pretty unusual. Like I said, no affordable makes have ever been made. You don't see them pop up for sale very often. This particular instrument is owned by a friend of mine who owns a repair store, and he bought this as a body, thinking that he was going to be able to put on keywork, and he probably will at some point to make it a fully functional instrument. It was just sold out of a repair catalog as replacement parts in case D ever got cracked or badly damaged. You could replace the parts. Though with this, the parts are, well, it's one part. It's one piece body. So barrel, which is almost identical to an E flat clarinet barrel, and a bell, and then one piece body. And again, the bell is very similar to an E flat clarinet bell, although I have done some measurement. It is a little bit different proportions from an E flat clarinet bell. Oh, speaking of taking measurements, that's one of the reasons I have this. Because there aren't affordable models, what would happen if we started 3D printing them? Which I've started doing. Here is a 3D printed barrel and a 3D printed bell, taken from exact measurements off of the existing D clarinet. And I think you kind of know where that's going. Eventually, a whole 3D printed body. So the possibility exists of being able to produce a less expensive D clarinet that anybody could be able to afford. That's my end goal there, and of course Jared and I are going to be working on that. Like I said, I've already got some of the parts done. This was mostly a challenge for me to work on some of my own modeling skills, so I actually designed these in the 3D program, which I don't do very often, mostly because my computer doesn't like processing that amount of data. But I've got them, and they seem to work. I wish I could play the D clarinet for you, but doesn't have keys. I can't really make a sound out on it. Yeah, that is the D Clarinet. Let me know down below if you've ever used a D Clarinet, played for it, written for it, have any experience with it. Do you think the D Clarinet needs to make a comeback so that we can use it? I'm curious. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think.